Today's show is sponsored by Armpit Hair Dye, because waving goodbye should be more colorful.
8:06 the time. It's Wake Up Wyoming. My name is Glenn Woods. Thanks for joining me. Well, if you know Nebraska, you might have heard the name of Trent Loos, L-O-O-S. He's a sixth-generation farmer from central Nebraska who's accepted a challenge to tell the story of the modern farming family and their methods, because just so much of what's told out there is not true. And you might not know this. He, along with some other people in Nebraska, have weekend yard sales. Now, what that is that windstorm that we had at the beginning of the week where some of those winds were like 92 miles an hour, literally. That means a lot of stuff blew from Wyoming to Nebraska. So if you want to go visit Trent's farm, he will have all of your stuff on sale back to you by what? This Saturday is when you started, Trent?
We'll save it all up until September for Junk Jaunt.
Oh, really? It sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Are you familiar with Junk Jaunt, Glenn?
No, I'm not. It sounds fun, though.
Actually, we in Nebraska do what you just said along Highway 2, which is considered a scenic route. I think it's the last weekend of September each year. Everybody has a yard sale. There's a full-blown map. They call it Junk Jaunt. I think last year they documented people from 40 states came in to be a part of that.
I did not know that. Now that I'm going to have to go see it. That just sounds like fun. And like we were saying, folks, most of what's for sale is stuff that blew out of Wyoming into Nebraska. You have a Facebook page that I follow. So sometimes when I'm doing show prep in the morning, I see you pop up with a live broadcast. You bring on some other people for a live video conversation. Who are the people that join you on that?
Well, every morning at 6:30 Central Time, I do what is called Across the Pond. I've had a dear friend in the UK, that'd be the United Kingdom, not the University of Kentucky.
Right.
That his name is Andrew Henderson. He's been a dear friend for 12 years. And last May, we got into a couple pontifications, and I decided that other people should take part in our pontifications.
Yeah.
So every morning at 6:30 Central Time, 12:30 London time, we do Across the Pond on Facebook Live for 15, 20 minutes, depending on what's going on.
Now, you did every so often, and I do this kind of thing too, besides the morning show on these radio stations here in Wyoming, I like to get on my own little Facebook or YouTube page and just do a separate little rant. You did one I had you on this program before, but this one I thought was right along the lines of what I've been talking about and writing about, that ranching and farming, but let's focus on ranching for a minute, is not detrimental to the landscape or the planet. It actually benefits it in so many ways. Now, I can talk about it, but you're in that line of work. So how does ranching actually help the environment?
Well, I'm just going to create the simplest visual that I know of. And, Glenn, that is that we know that forbs, cellulose material, grass, plants of all kind, take what other people call toxic materials, greenhouse gases, actually CO2 from the atmosphere, and turn them into oxygen. The more plants we have, the more conversion that takes place. The more animals that we have, the more plants that we need, and God created this thing called the cycle of life. Mm-hmm. And when everything works in harmony, and you have ranchers managing the land, and you have animals out there grazing. Oh, and by the way, this is a significant time in central Nebraska as well, because 75% of the sandhill cranes cross the Platte River right where I live. I'm in the flyway.
Wow.
And we've documented that those migratory birds use lands that are grazed 17 times more than land that sits idle.
Wow.
It only makes sense. When you have animals grazing, you create fresh, new growth. The healthier, the fresher the growth in the plant, the more absorption from the atmosphere. Again, this all comes back to the basic thing, the cycle of life, continuing the cycle.
If we go before human beings were here, it's not, I know those people would point out, those who would call themselves environmentalists, well, they used to have just massive herds of animal roaming all over the place. Mm-hmm. And sure, and that certainly did help. But with all of those animals also came a lot of death and disease, and it wasn't all good. I think it's much better for the environment to have somebody who can actually manage to say, well, this piece of land can handle this many animals on it, rather than it being overtrodden by who knows what kind of animals. And again, the death and disease that follows that is not necessarily good for the environment. So I'd rather have you there with your cattle, and I would assume you look out amongst your cattle and see other animals joining them.
Absolutely. We tend to forget. In fact, I just wrote my column this morning about this very topic. The survivability of the bald eagle really fell upon the landowners, the farmers, the ranchers, who supply 75% of all habitat for wildlife.
Right.
And, in your country, you cannot drive from Denver to Casper to Billings without seeing 2 million antelope. Mm-hmm. Well, watch where those antelope are grazing. They're out there browsing in the same areas where the cattle are. And in many cases, they're eating different things than cattle, and that's why the multi-species grazing, which Wyoming has always been very good at, bringing sheep in conjunction with cattle and in conjunction with horses, all of those animals tend to prefer different things, and you just create a healthier ecosystem. I really wish we could get back to more sheep grazing alongside and intertwine with the cattle. It would be better for everybody.
Well, now, isn't it also good? Yeah, I know they eat it. Comes back out in the form of fertilizer, which is also good. But just keeping it cut down the way they do when they graze, doesn't that promote more healthy growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And what the job of the rancher is, in fact, if you really want to look at that bison herd, which we're talking about from a migratory standpoint, interesting to know that they estimate the bison herd was somewhere between 60 million head and 120 million head at its peak. So let's just say the average then would be 80 million.
Right.
Do you know how many bovine are in the United States today? 80 million.
Oh, okay. So we're essentially doing the same thing.
Yeah, isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
Except what we call God's own cow country is the sandhills of Nebraska.
Right.
And the sandhills of Nebraska, at the time that the pioneers came, was not suitable for raising a family, because the bison had overgrazed it to the point where it was just nubbed down to nothing. In fact, the Kincaid Act of 1907 took the Homestead Act of 1862, which was all about homesteading 1/4 section. Well, the Kincaid Act changed the 1/4 to 1 section, because no farm family in Nebraska could make a living on 160 acres. But to your point, it's the fact that the ranchers and farmers manage these grazing animals on a rotational basis. We don't overgraze, we don't undergraze. That's our job as stewards of the land, is to graze the right amount, and it promotes the healthy ecosystems and keeps those plants healthy, and they continue to grow.
Okay.
Spot on.
I have seen, now growing up in Florida the way that I did, Florida is a big-time cattle state, and I used to sit and watch as cattle would move along grazing, and I would see deer. You ever seen a Florida key deer?
Mm-hmm. I have, actually, at the Babcock Ranch.
First time I ever saw one of those, I thought I was looking at a herd of dogs. They're not very big, but they were out there grazing right alongside, and I'm watching, as you mentioned, the cranes, and we, of course, all sorts of different cranes in Florida and different other kinds of birds that love to just walk right along or even right on top of these animals and wait for all the bugs to get kicked up so they can go ahead and eat all of that. And I just watched this constant cycle of everybody was helping everybody out. But I do like what you just mentioned there is, if you do notice that a piece of your land is being overgrazed, okay, you just move them over to the other section and let that section that they were grazing on come back, which back before you came along wouldn't have been the case. They would have just continued to tromp on it until nothing was left.
I have very dear friends, the Lightseas and families in Florida that are ranching. And most of those families on those ranches today, they will be glad to give you a tour, because the endangered species, particularly migratory fowl of Florida, are still in existence because the ranchers went out of their way to create habitat. Some of the greatest success stories that, Glenn, quite frankly, aren't being told properly, thank you for bringing that up, are what ranchers are doing in Florida around the Everglades and Adams County, Florida, and all of the Adams land and cattle, all of those places that have just been fantastic for wildlife habitat.
So let's close on this note then, and I'm going to make sure to grab this interview and put it up as a post on my websites here, so that people, if I can, I'd like to go back and grab some of the things you've written about and include that in my little write-up there. But so let's take a look at what you just said. In order for you to be a rancher, to do what you do, you have to make sure that you're not destroying the habitat. You have to encourage a healthy habitat, which is exactly the opposite of what environmentalists are telling people that you're doing.
So I grew up in Illinois, Quincy, Illinois, Adams County. My family has farmed the same land since 1832. I have a nephew that's 16 years old this year. He will take over and continue to farm that land that my family's been farming since 1832. If what farmers are doing was not sustainable, how would one family be in business for nearly 200 years?
There you go. Trent, always a pleasure to have you on. I will have you back more often. Thank you for it.
I think I said this last time. I need to stop in and have a cup of coffee and say, hey.
Anytime. Yeah. I'll send you a note right now, and I'll let you know exactly how you can do that. All right. Thank you, Trent. 8:17. Wake up, Wyoming.